Això en quin idioma va? Vale? Okay, buena tarde a tothom, buenas tardes. Welcome. It's a very special occasion today because of many different reasons. It's a very important occasion, what it is under COVID-19 conditions. And so it is a hybrid event. We have, in fact, as you see, the room, you cannot see the reality because we are more than 100 people inscribed and participating in this event, but most of them prefer to follow the session at home. And this is why I salute as well everybody that's watching it online. And this is not the only reason to salute everybody. I was saying this is an important occasion for different reasons. One main reason, of course, is because of the subject. We are really, and we can see it every day, in a climate emergency, and in an emergency in the area of the Mediterranean, especially because of the economic and therefore social and socio-economic impact of the climate change that we are going through. As it is well assessed in the study that is being presented today, we know, maybe not in all its complexity, but we know more or less what it is about right now regarding the climate change, and especially in the area of the Mediterranean, because the Mediterranean, in this respect, is a fragile area, I would say. For some years, I was working in the sector of public works 30 years back when we were preparing the Olympic Games in Barcelona. And I observed that any time that we opened a new road or the impact we were causing on nature was very much a lasting one. In other countries, more to the north, the nature is more capable to recover its normal shape. The Mediterranean is a fragile area, and it is a delicate equilibrium in many respects, and then with high complexity because of the environmental conditions and because of its socio-economic conditions, and I would say even because of its different cultural traditions, because it's different evolution in the different parts of our sea. As Plato said, we are all like frogs watching on the runs of this mar in which we are. Okay, but we have today very good reasons to gather here because it is an important thing to present this study on the socio-economic impacts on climate change. And we have a wonderful study, and then for the occasion we have a wonderful panel of people to explain it as what it is about. In fact, I have to mention that the two institutions that have participated in providing the occasion and for the study and its publication, etc., is, of course, IMET. This is why we are here, European Institute of the Mediterranean. But I would mainly stress the participation of PRIMA. And as you know, PRIMA means Partnership for Research and Innovation in the Mediterranean Area. And this is under, if I'm not in an error, under the shape of a foundation, because it's in fact a foundation, but it is a public institution, in fact, because it's the one that's in charge of channeling through successive calls the funds for research and innovation in the Euro-Mediterranean area and Euromed programs, and with, well, some good, let me say it so, budget, because I understand it's more than 500 million, and therefore devoted especially to develop knowledge and common innovation solutions for sustainable agri-food systems and integrated water provision and management in the Mediterranean area, and to develop, in that sense, climate resilient, efficient, cost-effective solutions, etc. So we are talking about something important, something serious. And it is important as well that this is one of the priorities of the Union for the Mediterranean. And this is why we have with us the Assistant Secretary General, Isidro González, who is a senior Spanish diplomat, but in this case is very much senior official, or very senior representative of the Union for the Mediterranean Secretariat, specifically in charge of this area regarding climate change, water management, etc. And this is why I'm most happy that he is here with us. And we will see later on that we have first introduction by Francisco Dobler Reyes, professor, I would say, Francisco Dobler Reyes, who's a true specialist. No? We will see that. And we will see that the content of the study is on this climate change impact in the Mediterranean basin, and then the impact on water, agriculture, and food in the countries of the Mediterranean basin, and then the socio-economic impacts of climate change, and then how have we the evidence and therefore the decisions to be made. This is the content of the study. I'm following it through its main authors who will develop it later. And therefore, I am most happy to pass the floor in the first moment, in this case, for the introductory speech to Isidro González. So, Isidro, you have the floor.
Gracias, embajador. Yo voy a hablar español, si puedo.
Oh, yes. I have to say that the two languages are Spanish and English. I don't know which is the share of the audience here or at home, but you may speak in any of the two languages, which there is translation for everybody who wants to use it. Así pues, muy bien, Isidro, tienes la palabra.
En español isleño, ya sabes, ¿no?
En español isleño también se admite.
Nada, un saludo a todos, buenas tardes, a los que estáis aquí y a los que estáis online desde una de las ciudades más bonitas de España, que es Barcelona, ya casi mi preferida tras 2 años y medio aquí, donde me siento como en casa. Y nada, para hablar de un asunto que ya no es como hace 15 años cuando lanzó Al Gore su famosa película, algo que todavía sonaba a ciencia ficción, una visión alarmista. Esto es una gran realidad. Hoy el presidente Joe Biden ha pedido un estudio sobre las causas de estos tornados inesperados en un lugar muy inusual para tornados en el centro de Estados Unidos, cuando normalmente los tornados tienen lugar cerca del Golfo de México. Algo está pasando, algo está cambiando, y también está pasando en Europa. Vimos hace unos meses también en Alemania casi unos 150 muertos. No hablamos de Bangladesh, de la India, hablamos de Alemania. Están pasando cosas muy extrañas, ¿no? Y el cambio climático se ceba sobre todo en una región que es el Mediterráneo, la segunda más afectada del planeta por el cambio climático, solo superada por el Ártico. O sea, después del Ártico viene la región mediterránea. Una región donde las temperaturas están creciendo un 20% más que la media de todo el planeta, donde si sigue la tendencia actual hacia el año 2040, hablamos de 19 años que nos faltan, tendremos 2,2 grados más centígrados de media. Si sigue la tendencia y no hacemos nada para evitarlo, para el año 2100 tendremos 3,8 grados centígrados más. Las consecuencias podrían ser terribles en términos de producción agrícola, pesca, vida en los entornos costeros. El nivel del mar También, según distintos estudios, pues bueno, pues se espera, si sigue la tendencia actual, que en el año 2100 el nivel del mar del Mediterráneo suba 1 metro más. Esto va a afectar a 37 millones de personas que viven en la costa, directamente en la costa, con lo cual, por supuesto que es un factor socioeconómico de primer nivel, cómo va a afectar a lo más básico, que es la vivienda, la vida, el día a día de las personas, sus propias casas, ¿no? El impacto sanitario también, el impacto sobre la salud de este aumento de las temperaturas, del cambio climático, pues también se nota. La calidad del aire es cada vez peor, la contaminación que afecta a las ciudades, cada vez incluso fallecen más personas por afecciones de tipo respiratorio debido a este aumento de las temperaturas, al cambio climático. ¿Qué decir de estas escenas que vemos por televisión cada día? Yo las he visto además en persona, en Tenerife. Yo he visto la llegada de cayucos, yo he visto cómo los llevan a dependencias de la Policía Nacional. Yo he hablado con ellos, son niños de 15 años, niños que creen que están jugando, que cuando llegan están con una cara de shock porque se han jugado la vida y es muy traumático. Pasados 3 días, cuando hablas con ellos, ya les parece un juego, pero realmente te llega al corazón, sobre todo si eres padre, ¿no? Como lo soy yo y muchos de vosotros. Bueno, pues las migraciones forzosas están dándose en gran parte también por el problema del cambio climático, la falta de acceso al agua, la degradación del suelo, la desertificación, las sequías. Todo esto está haciendo que decenas de miles de personas tengan que abandonar su tierra. Nadie abandona su tierra, su casa, si no es por una razón muy importante, evidentemente. Y es lo que está pasando, sobre todo en la ribera sur del Mediterráneo. Esto es una realidad, y nos debe llevar a pensar sobre qué acciones podemos coordinar y qué podemos hacer entre todos los países europeos y de la ribera del Mediterráneo. En el caso de la Unión por el Mediterráneo, bueno, pues lo último que hemos intentado es reunirnos con los ministros de Asuntos Exteriores de nuestros 42 países miembros el pasado 29 de noviembre en el 6º Foro Regional, que es nuestra reunión de ministros de Exteriores, con una notable presencia récord en la historia nuestra de ministros y de secretarios de Estado. Y el cambio climático pues, fue, como no, uno de los temas donde se abordaron. Un cambio climático que también es promotor de conflictos, ¿no? Que a nadie se le escape que hay conflictos como el israelo-palestino, que conozco en parte porque viví en Jerusalén. Aquí tenemos con nosotros el embajador Gómez Acebo, que ha sido embajador de España en Israel, y que el agua, la escasez de agua, la sequía, el cambio climático es uno de los motivos, de las razones por las que hay un conflicto israelo-palestino. En otros países, por el acceso a las aguas del Nilo entre Egipto, Sudán, Etiopía, etcétera, y un larguísimo etcétera. Pues en esta reunión, como he dicho, pues bueno, pues se ha vuelto a llamar la atención sobre la urgencia de actuar en este campo, y durante el año, previamente a esta reunión, a nivel sectorial, celebramos en el marco de la Unión por el Mediterráneo 3 reuniones de ministros que creo que hay que destacar. La primera en febrero sobre economía azul, un nombre que a mí no me gusta porque eso de economía azul, verde, no se sabe, es economía del mar y de todo lo relacionado con el mar, que pues, viene a ser navegación marítima, pesca, turismo sostenible, turismo costero, que son muy importantes en España, acuacultura. El 51% de los peces que comemos ya no se pescan, vienen de piscifactorías, vienen de la acuacultura, o sea que ahí abordamos muchísimos temas muy importantes. Se hizo un llamamiento a la reducción de gases nocivos de los barcos. El Mediterráneo, un mar muy pequeñito, un lago que cubre un 1% de la superficie del planeta, pues bueno, pues por el Mediterráneo transita un tercio de la navegación marítima mundial. 1 de cada 3 barcos que surcan los mares del planeta surca el Mediterráneo, con mucha presencia de cruceros, grandes contaminantes. Bueno, pues estamos intentando trabajar para que esos barcos no contaminen tanto, ¿no? También abordamos el problema de la sobrepesca, etcétera. No me quiero extender mucho porque son tantas cosas que decir que si no. En la segunda ministerial de este año, sectorial sobre energía, pues evidentemente se aprobaron medidas para intentar avanzar lo más rápidamente posible en la transición energética hacia modelos energéticos verdes, sostenibles, respetuosos con el medio ambiente, e ir dejando poco a poco los combustibles fósiles. Ahí, teniendo como miembros a a países productores como Argelia y tal no es fácil, pero vamos ya por la misma vía y se está avanzando. Y finalmente, el 4 de octubre tuvimos en El Cairo una reunión de ministros sobre medio ambiente y acción climática, que también lanzó un mensaje importante, una agenda medioambiental para el Mediterráneo, y permitió que los países del marco euro-mediterráneo acudieran a Glasgow, a la COP26, con una agenda única, con una posición única, lo cual yo creo que es un hito que hay que celebrar, y que tendrá su continuación en un evento muy importante que tendrá lugar el año que viene, que es la COP27, que tendrá lugar en Egipto. Muy buena noticia que un país del Mediterráneo acoja la COP27. Eso permitirá dar un impulso, creemos, a las legislaciones nacionales, a una mayor concienciación sobre la necesidad de respetar el medio ambiente y de preservarlo porque está muy dañado, y que sea un país importante en el mundo árabe y en la ribera sur del Mediterráneo como Egipto el que haya dado ese paso. Me parece que es un hito que hay que celebrar. Y por mi parte nada más, que deseoso de escuchar a los distintos ponentes. Seguro que será todo muy interesante, y agradezco, embajador, la invitación, a Octavi, Prima, como siempre, son nuestra organización hermana. Mucho nuestro agradecimiento y nada más por el momento. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias, Isidro. Yo creo que nos has aportado algunos puntos importantes en cómo el tema está, digamos, navegando, nunca mejor dicho o mal dicho, no lo sé, en las complicaciones de la vida institucional, intergubernamental, etcétera, hasta que eso se transforme en medidas efectivas, ¿no? Pero que entre la investigación y la determinación de posibles soluciones y su implementación media un trecho grande, que es el que vosotros intentáis cruzar,
Sí, sí.
Y transformando posibles soluciones en efectivas soluciones. Yo creo, por tanto, la política, el ejercicio de la puesta de acuerdo entre los distintos actores, en este caso fundamentalmente los gobiernos de los estados, y juntando a ello pues el goodwill, ¿no?, de la sociedad civil y de los distintos actores que lo pueden acompañar y hacer posible, las opiniones públicas, etcétera, es especialmente importante. Yo creo que en eso, yo diría que cada día la Unión por el Mediterráneo está consiguiendo cumplirlo mejor. Y conste que habla alguien que criticó durante bastantes años la Unión por el Mediterráneo porque no sabía encontrar en un nacimiento complicado que tuvo cuál era de verdad su posible papel. Yo creo que ahora ese papel de transformador de posibles planteamientos en políticas efectivas a través de la puesta en común de la voluntad de los estados con las correspondientes negociaciones, etcétera, ese trabajo diplomático extraordinariamente necesario es el que crecientemente está cumpliendo la Unión por el Mediterráneo, y por tanto me alegro muy especialmente. He de decir que vamos a tener un pequeño cambio en el programa, porque estaba previsto que nos acompañara ahora también Gerard Figueras, que es el secretario para Acción Exterior de la Generalitat de Cataluña y que está viniendo de las montañas. No lo digo como alegoría, sino físicamente, porque tenían un acto todas las regiones del norte de España, desde el País Vasco hasta aquí, y las del sur de Francia, y hay un traspaso de presidencia de ese ejercicio, y sé que va a llegar, pero que tardará unos minutos, con lo cual lo que haremos será que él va a ser el que presida el panel que va a suceder a lo que vamos a hacer en primer lugar ahora, que es pasarle la palabra al profesor Francisco Dobla Reyes para que nos haga una primera introducción al tema. Él es profesor de investigación del Instituto Catalán para la Investigación y Estudios Avanzados, el conocido ICREA, que es un centro de excelencia internacional, y que es director del Departamento de Ciencias de la Tierra del Barcelona Supercomputing Center, que es otro de los artefactos de nivel internacional en el campo científico que existen en Barcelona, ¿no? Y a partir de ahí ya será cuando Gerard Figueras y la moderadora que le acompañará, Clara Ferrer, pues darán paso a los panelistas de la sesión. Por tanto, vamos a oír al doctor Francisco Doblar Reyes, si es que está disponible online. Ah, ya estás ahí, perdón, que
Sí.
ya no estaba viendo hacia el otro lado. Pues muchas gracias y ahí tienes la palabra y la sesión. Vamos a ponernos abajo, que si no, no lo veo.
Muchas gracias, Senen. Y primero que nada, en primer lugar, disculpas por no acompañaros, porque me habría encantado estar ahí, sobre todo para poder disfrutar de las ponencias y, en segundo lugar, para poder saludar a algunos amigos como son Vicky y Elena. Pero he cogido un resfriado y en previsión de males mayores he decidido quedarme en casa y hacer la ponencia desde aquí. Pasaré al inglés para simplicidad, porque la presentación está en inglés y bueno, también teniendo en cuenta la audiencia que tenemos. Voy a compartir la pantalla, a ver si lo puedo hacer bien. Aquí. Muy bien. Como decía Senen, soy investigador ICREA y también trabajo en el Barcelona Supercomputing Center. And I'm going to talk about the synthesis of the last IPCC report, the sixth one, in particular about the results of the Working Group 1. IPCC stands for the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a panel that is already organized by the United Nations framework on climate change and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and this body is commissioning reports that are prepared by sets of scientists that work together for over several years. The IPCC, the panel, follows very strict regulations to prepare its reports. It's, as I said, prepared by scientists who assess the available literature since the previous reports and using objective, open and transparent methodologies that try to extract the latest knowledge that the scientific community has about climate change, the options for adaptation, and the mitigation of climate change. It has to provide reports that are policy neutral. So this is very important. It's one of the first things that we are told when we start participating in the panel. And that doesn't mean that we are not taking into account policy, but we shouldn't formulate any recommendations concerning any of the policy options that the global society has in front of it. The reports are structured in 3 different groups. The first group, which is the one I'm going to talk about, that is dealing with what is happening in the climate system. It's dealing mainly with the physical aspects of the climate system, while Working Group 2 deals with the risks that the climate system is undergoing and will undergo in the future. And finally, Working Group 3 is concerned by what can be done to address climate change in terms of emissions and socioeconomic options. The cycle of reports of this 6th assessment report started with 3 special reports that were published in 2018 and 2019, focusing on 3 different aspects. The first one is what are the options to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees with respect to pre-industrial levels, the impact of climate change on the oceans and the cryosphere, and also the impact of climate change on land use. Then in the last 5 to 6 years, we've been working a number of scientists on preparing the 3 volumes of the 6th assessment report that correspond to each of the 3 working groups that are part of the IPCC. This will be complemented in September 2022 by the synthesis report that will bring together the conclusions of the 3 volumes. And this will be a very important contribution to the global stocktake organized by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that will measure and estimate what are the efforts in limiting the impacts and the human action. It's important to bear in mind that this is the 6th assessment report. There were 5 more reports that started the first one in 1990. So we are talking of an activity that has been going on already for more than 30 years, and that has had a very strong impact on the policy side, but also in societal and scientific communities. As we have seen in during the COP26 in Glasgow, where the IPCC report, Volume 1, played an important role in shaping some of the discussions that took place there. This volume, the volume prepared by the Working Group 1, was prepared by 234 authors from many different countries around the world. Unfortunately, the rate between women and men is still unsatisfactory, but at least there is an effort to bring in new actors into these bodies. The team is created following volunteering scientists with a very wide range of expertise that are selected by the countries themselves. The report undergoes a very severe and strict review process with more than 78,000 review comments. And if anyone has published a paper in a scientific journal, can already figure out what the amount of work that is behind addressing this huge number of comments. The report also receives comments from the different countries, and this is very important because it's fundamental to bear in mind that this is not a scientific report for scientists. This is a report that is commissioned by the countries themselves, and it will reflect the view of the countries that will make the report theirs. And somehow this is reflected in the approval session that took place online over 2 weeks, where all the governments that are part of the UNFCCC system unanimously approved the report and the messages that I'm going to report here. One of the first reports that one of the first messages that we can show here is that there are recent changes in the climate system that are widespread, rapid, and are intensifying. And these changes are unprecedented in thousands of years. And this is something that came a bit as a shock when the volume was published in last August, because for the first time the language allowed to use terms like unprecedented or unequivocal, as we'll see in a message that will follow next. So what is happening in the climate system is exceptional, and this is unprecedented at a human scale. So the planet is warming almost everywhere, is warming rapidly, and it's warming over a background of a planet that was actually cooling. It has been a very long time since that happened. And this is an illustration. In the horizontal axis, you have the time on the left from year 1 of our era to the last year, 2020. And in the vertical, you have temperature. So the differences in temperature with respect to the reference period that is taken as 1850 to 1900. what we can see is that the warming in the last few decades is unprecedented when we compare it to what happens or what we get from the estimates of the scientific community over the last 2,000 years. The warming in the last decade at the global scale has been 1.1 with respect to the reference period. So since the last, the second half of the 19th century, the planet is 1.1 degrees warmer. And this is not particularly good news, if especially for those sectors that are sensitive to global warming. Other aspects that are unprecedented at the human scale are the CO2 concentration, the level of the rate of sea level rise, the melting of Arctic sea ice, and the retreating of glaciers. And in particular for the CO2 concentrations, comparing with the proxies that are taken from ice cores, we can already conclude that the levels of CO2 concentrations that we have in the atmosphere are the highest since at least 2 million years. Another very concrete message from the report is that it is indisputable that human activities are behind the climate change that we have been observing, and this includes as well the occurrence of heat waves, heavy rainfall droughts that are both more frequent and severe. And again, I would like to emphasize the use of the word indisputable, in the sense that there is no discussion about the actual responsibility of the human action to explain these changes. And we know this from experiments that are performed by the community, in which we can, using climate models that try to reproduce all the relevant processes in the climate system, that includes the atmosphere, the ocean, the biosphere, and the cryosphere, that unless we introduce the human factor that is behind the increase in the concentration of certain species in the atmosphere, we are unable to reproduce the observed changes in climate in particular in the last 50 years. So somehow these experiments take into account both human and natural factors that determine the evolution of temperature. And it's only by introducing these human components that we can explain what happens and this unprecedented rate of warming in the planet. So knowing that the climate is already warming, the report concludes that unless there are immediate, rapid, and large-scale reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees won't be within our reach. And 1.5 degrees, I remind you, is one of the two thresholds considered by the Paris Agreement that was signed in 2015, and that established that efforts to limit climate change should try to remain the global mean temperature below 2 degrees with respect to the reference period, so the late 19th century, and make everything possible to limit it below 1.5 degrees of warming. So where are we? So this is illustrated in this figure, again, using global mean temperature, which is the mean temperature of the air near the surface at the global scale. And the black line represents the observed climate in the last 70 years, and the five colored lines correspond to 5 different features that have been considered in the report. And what we can see is that by the end of the century, the different futures that correspond to different situations in which we make reductions of the emissions of greenhouse gases, or we continue or even increase the emissions of greenhouse gases, give a very different rate of warming at the end of the century. And in particular, if we look at the light blue and dark blue cases, these are the only ones that can be compatible with limiting global warming to the below the thresholds 1.5 in the light blue case and 2 degrees in the dark blue case. If we look at the emissions that correspond to the light blue and dark blue cases, the only way to limit the global warming to 1.5 degrees at the light blue curve here in the case of the emissions of carbon dioxide per year is by reaching the net zero of emissions by 2050, and from that point on introduce techniques of capturing CO2 that can be very aggressive. Something similar, although with a slightly different dates, occurs for the dark blue emission scenario. And I would like to say that the emission scenario that in which we are currently closer is the orange one, and it's probably the one the most compatible with the declared efforts by the countries to reduce their emissions of greenhouse gases. Probably the future will lie in between the dark blue and the orange blue, but still the report, and this is very important to mention it, is not assigning any probability to any of these scenarios that we are considering in the report to extract our conclusions. So climate change is already affecting every region on Earth in many different ways, and these changes that we experience will be worse with increasing further warming, and this again links to the path that will follow in the future years. So it won't be the same following the the light blue curve here, or the dark blue curve, or the orange curve. It could be even worse. We might be following the red or dark red curves that appear here, and that would lead us to very disastrous consequences. So as I said, climate change is already being estimated in many different variables, in many different indicators in most of the regions of the planet. These are estimates for the different regions that were considered in the report for the occurrence of droughts over the historical period, so over the last 150 years. And what we can see is that the orange regions are those in which we can observe an increase in the frequency and severity of droughts, while those that appear with in green correspond to regions in which drought is decreasing. We can see a pervasive presence of regions where drought is actually increasing. And for reference, the Mediterranean is found here. So this is the Mediterranean region, and this is the European region. More specifically for the Mediterranean, what we can observe is that although it's not the region that is warming the fastest, as it's been mentioned before, it's one of the regions in which there is a conjunction between the warming that is faster than the global mean temperature, the warming in the global mean temperature that is measuring the average warming around the planet. So it's warming faster than the average of the planet. And at the same time, it's one of the very few regions of the planet where there is a robust estimate of decreases in precipitation. Those decreases are reaching values that can be up to 30 or 40% with respect to the current precipitation levels. So the conjunction of higher temperatures and reduced precipitation can explain why we have seen in the past an increase in the severity of drought, and it will be even more severe and more frequent in future years. Of course, the final path that will be followed depends on the future emissions that we'll be using in our socioeconomic evolution. The report comes along with a very interesting tool, the interactive atlas, where you can find most of the figures that have been used in the reports, and many more figures that you can even use for your presentations or your teaching activities, or even to explore and try to address specific questions that are not addressed in the reports. I invite you to have a look at this interactive atlas, because it's really powerful and can become a reference tool for those that are interested and vulnerable to climate change. Somehow there is no going back from some changes in the climate system. So even if we reduce our emissions and even capture CO2, there are some things that will continue, some changes that won't stop for thousands of years to come. And one of the most obvious is the changes in sea level. These are figures of the changes in mean sea level relative to the values in the year 1900. And what we can see is that for the year 2100, the end of this century, we can expect increases in the mean global sea level of anything between 0.5 meter and up to 1 meter, depending on the scenario that we consider. The problem is that sea level rise won't stop in 2100, and unfortunately will continue even if we consider one of the mitigation scenarios. And the estimates for the year 2300, so in 280 years from now, is anything of increases of sea level between 0.5 meter, that would mean stabilization of the increases in sea level, up to more than 3 meters at the global scale. And this is with one of the mitigation scenarios. If we consider some scenarios that are not mitigated and even increase the emissions of greenhouse gases, we can reach easily 7 meters of increase of sea level at the global scale. And we can go well beyond this if we consider processes for which we still don't know enough. So there is a lot of research still to be done, such as the instability of the marine ice cliffs in the floating ice sheets in places like Antarctica. However, many of the changes could be slowed down, and others could be stopped if we limit global warming. So reaching a certain level of warming at the end of the century is very important, because the impacts of climate change will be somehow proportional to the level of warming that we'll reach at the end of the century. So somehow concluding the presentation, to limit global warming, strong, rapid, and sustained reductions in greenhouse gases such as CO2, methane, and others are necessary. And the good thing and the good news is that this brings new opportunities for having a much better world, and having also consequences, positive consequences, such as the improvements in air quality, because some of these emissions are associated with emissions of really harmful gases and particles that are affecting human health. So that was my last slide. It's a very shallow description of the really dense and interesting content of this report that I invite you to consult and to have a look at following some of the links that appear in this slide here. Thanks very much, and apologies again for not being able to join you tonight at the IEMED.
Well, thank you very much, Professor. And as announced, we have now the first panel. Well, we have the panel, we have the moderator, but we have already with us, and we have had during the whole presentation, Gerard Figueres, who's the Secretary for the Action of the Generalitat de Catalunya, who will be with you, and then you moderate the session, because maybe some people need to be moderated. we are very much eager for action against climate change. So, okay, i els del panel podeu pujar, sisplau.
Okay, so yeah, I just wanted to, well, if you can come up to that, yeah. So first of all, well, I'm Clara Ferrer. I'll be moderating the debate. If you go, okay? Yeah. Well, first of all, Gerard, I'd like to introduce you, Secretary for Foreign Action of the Government of Catalonia. Welcome you all, and well, to my right, I'll have Elena Tsotlaki. I'll just introduce them when they start speaking, yeah? We have Victoria Reyes and Joan Subirats here, okay? So if we can start with your intervention, Gerard.
Okay. Thank you, Clara. And sorry for not being able to reach the opening session, but we had today in the Pyrenees, we had the transition among one of our regional networks called la Comunitat de Treball dels Pirineus. So we were ending the Catalan presidency of the entity and giving it to the Basque country, and it had a bit of delay. So sometimes coming from the mountains to the city is not as fast as we would like. But anyway, sorry and happy for being finally here. And just before allowing the debate to start, just give me a couple of minutes to just share with you some ideas on behalf of the government of Catalonia. And first of all, I have to start by saying, dear IEMET Executive President, Mr. Sanén Florença, dear Union for the Mediterranean Vice President, Mr. Isidro González, dear Prima Director, Mr. Octavi Quintana, and dear colleagues, friends, and all the people who is following us through the internet. Thank you very much for inviting us to this presentation of the publication of the policy study, Socioeconomic Impacts of Climate Change in the Mediterranean, commissioned together by IEMET and the Prima Foundation. It is always an honor and satisfaction to know that institutions present in our country are working for the improvement of the Mediterranean, which has historically, and it is also today, a priority for the government of Catalonia foreign action. Precisely, our government has endowed itself a Mediterranean strategy, what we call the MedCat 2030, and an associated plan of action. This is a transversal and broad framework with the main objective of encouraging regional and promoting exchanges between the two shores of our sea, between the two shores of the Mediterranean. As part of this government strategy, the promotion of competitiveness and innovation in the Mediterranean is one of our strategic objectives. The regional problems endemic to the Mediterranean, sparked by recent crisis, require diverse and change, and therefore from Catalonia, we focus on policies and initiatives provide more added value and future to make a sustainable Mediterranean cohesive but also competitive in line with the European Union policies. That means the Green Deal, the integrated maritime policy, the new European Union Mediterranean agenda, and more obviously, the border framework and its agenda 2030. The narrative of the Mediterranean strategy is linked to diversity and dialogue, to the neighborhood, and to the association. Strengthen network alliances from the West Bank to the north, south and east to improve the spaces of relationship, mutual knowledge, progress and innovation, without forgetting the new economies, circular, social and green and blue. A Catalonia that is committed to connectivity with the whole of the Mediterranean. One of its current priorities is to provide the necessary infrastructures such as 5G and make the Mediterranean corridor also a reality soon. We also believe in innovation. We believe that innovation must be the driver for economic and social development in the Mediterranean to face changes with causes climate change, but also the exceptional situation generated by the current COVID-19 pandemic. We know that Prima is one of the main drivers of this innovation in the specific field of agriculture and water management, and we celebrate the success of this new program based in Barcelona. Precisely, and in line with what he said, The knowledge and digital economy is a strategic axis for the government plan of this legislature. In this sense, Catalonia is fully committed to innovation as a driver of economic and social development. For this, it is endowed with a risk-cut strategy, which is now updated with a view to the horizon 2030, and in line with what marked at the time the Europe 2020 strategy for smart, sustainable, and inclusive growth. The risk-cut 2030, in line with the European Green Deal, is committed to transformative and responsible research and innovation as the main driver towards a greener, digital, resilient, and fair socioeconomic model. All actors, and I am referring from researchers to public to administrations, companies, and civil society associations, all together collaborate in research and innovation with the aim of aligning processes and results with these values, needs, and especially expectations of society. A key challenge is to increase the connection between technological capabilities and the needs of business and public services so that innovation becomes a driver of economic and social development. For going to the conclusion, in this framework, the government of Catalonia joins the commemoration of the Mediterranean Day, celebrated for first time this last 28th of November, as part of the Union for Mediterranean campaign. On this day, Catalonia wants to reaffirm its commitment to the Mediterranean, which has already made clear in 2019 with the adoption of the Mediterranean strategy of Catalonia, which I was previously referring. For this year, on the occasion of the new Mediterranean agenda of the European Union, from the Ministry for Foreign Action and Open Government of La Generalitat, we are working to contribute to its implementation from an innovative vision on the Mediterranean on the future, also in the framework of the Conference of the Future of Europe, the COFOE, and on the stage of the new generation of Euro-Mediterranean programs. It is in this context that we place a special emphasis to the multi-level governance in the Mediterranean, with the aim of promoting a creation of Mediterranean macro region that promotes a greater coordination and synergies in the whole of the region. Finally, I just would like to thank again IEMET and Prima for organizing this presentation, for letting us the opportunity to be part of that, and especially to my colleagues here on the table for all the presentations and discussions, moderate discussions, as Nen was emphasizing, we are going to have this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gerard Figueras. Sorry, because before it was all very quick. Let's start the table discussion. Yeah, I wanted to also introduce Alain Safa, who's online today. He's part of the table. So we have Victoria Reyes to my right, Elena Soplaki, John Subirats, and Alain Safa online. So, well, good afternoon to everyone who's present and who is connected online. Well, thank you for attending the presentation of the policy study, Socio-Economic Impacts of Climate Change in the Mediterranean, as everyone before me has been mentioning. Well, my name is Clara Ferrer, as I've told you, and I'm going to introduce you to the speakers and moderate the debate, okay? So I'll let you know who they are and what they're going to speak about. But first of all, as it has been explained before me, the Mediterranean Basin is one of the most affected areas of the world by the threats of climate change. It is considered the real hotspot of climate change because it suffers, as we will see afterwards, an increase of temperature 20% higher than the world average. In fact, Francisco was explaining how it was one of the medium increase temperature, so one of the areas that's most affected. So the presentation of this policy study wants to be a step forward in the generation of knowledge around the socio-economical impact of climate change in the Mediterranean area, so that apart from engaging on a scientific consensus on its impact, which we all know and we all have, we also find one as how to deal with this problem. So we need a consensus in the scientific impact, but also we need maybe a political consensus or a social and political consensus on how to deal with it. So with this perspective, today we'll have pleasure to hear several points of view of scientists, figures that will give us an insight on which are these socio-ecological and economic threats to that climate change will bring on this Mediterranean basin, Barcelona being included in it, as well as the response societies can have to address these threats. And we will also hear the other point of view from the policy point of view. Well, we heard Gerard, we will hear Mr. Joan Subirats, who need the scientific information in order to be able to make decisions that will imply other issues and problems. So let's hear our first panelist, who is Ms. Victoria Reyes. She's a research professor at the Catalan Institution for Research and Advanced Studies, and her research focuses on indigenous and local knowledge about the natural environment and the relevance of this knowledge for understanding and addressing climate and environmental crises. In your chapter, you point out the importance of having a socio-ecological perspective of climate change, so which are the most important threats that lie ahead of us, and what do you think the governments and social systems approach to them should be?
Well, thank you, Clara, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for being here. I have preparation to this question. I have prepared this presentation. I just want to start by saying that what I'm going to be presenting comes from insights from my research group that it's called LASER at the Autonomous University of Barcelona, at the ICTA Autonomous University of Barcelona, but it also comes from insights from a report that was prepared by the IPC members of the IPCC that Douglas, Francisco Douglas just presented, and the IPBES, which is a similar effort but based in ecosystem services and the state of nature. So at some point we got together scientists that have worked in the IPCC and scientists that have worked in the state of nature, and trying to see what are the linkages of the two threats that society has. And in this presentation, I have tried to bring those also with a Mediterranean perspective. So, so everyone knows that the Mediterranean basin is a hotspot with high levels of biodiversity, and this biodiversity it's important because of the high levels of endemism, and it's reflected in big diverse marine, freshwater, and terrestrial ecosystems. But this diversity is also important. Is important not only in itself, but also because it provides a bunch of services and a bunch of tools and that allow human life in the area. So, for example, in this is a particular table that shows some of the services, the ecosystem services that the forests in the Mediterranean system provide, and this goes from providing wood, but also providing regulating services like water regulation, soil prevention of soil erosion, climate regulation. They also provide cultural services like recreation or etc. Right? So biodiversity is not only important by itself, but also because it provides many services to people, and we could do a similar table with fisheries or etc. So this very rich diversity, usually the idea that is so special in the Mediterranean, we natural scientists argue that this comes from the very particular climatic condition of the area, right? We have very dry summers, but we have very mild winters that have very good conditions for productivity, and we have also in the whole Mediterranean, we have a lot of diverse ranges of altitude, the sea, the rivers, right? So all this diversity provide the basis for big biodiversity. But it is also true that the rich biodiversity that we observe has been also, particularly in the Mediterranean, created by people. The rich biodiversity that we enjoy has been created through diverse fire management, grazing, cutting, all these forms of managing nature that have been created by society since the Neolithic had contributed to increase biodiversity in the system. So in the Mediterranean system, particularly more than in other places on Earth, we can talk about this co-evolution of societies and the diverse biotas of the Mediterranean. And that's just gonna stop for 1 minute with an example. So if you look, for example, the case of Sierra Nevada, right? Sierra Nevada, you would think that it's one of the richest areas the richest hotspots of the Mediterranean basin. And you might think, oh, this is because of the altitude gradient, the temperature, but in fact, the high biodiversity of Sierra Nevada is human-made, right? The fact that there has been all these traditional water management systems that are there since the Neolithic is what has made possible that there is a big biodiversity that spans through the region. So changing the water management of the acequias and all these, like las acequias de careo, no, los aliviaderos, all this complexity, changing that has resulted in a change in the biodiversity in the region. So all this was to kind of like explain a little bit this idea of the social ecological system, right? Where we have an ecological system that interacts with the social system, and looking at that, it's what gives the biodiversity in the area. So the social ecological systems is the idea that there is a biogeographical and physical region, but there are social actors and institutions that modify that. And this is important when we start talking about climate change, right? Because climate change, Francisco Dobles has introduced to us to all the changes in the biophysical systems, but these changes have very real, concrete effects in the social ecological systems that we have. And here, this was one of the main results of this report on the IPCC and the IPBES, that there is a need to consider climate change through the impacts that it has in the biological system and in the quality of life. So ignoring that there's a inseparable nature of the impacts, no, between climate, biodiversity, and human quality of life, will result in policies that are, or in trying to find solutions that are not optimal, right? Because you try to solve the problem of climate change, but you don't realize that you are affecting biodiversity or that you are affecting the quality of life of people. So, for example, in the case of the Mediterranean, we know that Mediterranean biodiversity is heavily threatened, right? So, for example, about 80% of the Mediterranean biodiversity is in the sea is under threat, and there is only 9% of marine protected areas that are officially protected. You can also have you have also maps there of the IUCN showing the level of threatened species for freshwater or terrestrial species. So there is like this big threat to the biodiversity, and these threats, I mean, they are caused by a number of drivers, right? The threats to biodiversity come from invasive species, from exploitation of the resources, right? Over fisheries, extraction of timber and non-timber forest products. The threats to biodiversity also come from pollution in the air, on the water, and they also come from land use and land change. And obviously, climate change is a big threat to biodiversity. We have heard in presentations before that the main impacts of climate change in the area have to do with the increase in temperature and the reduction of the rainfall. But all these are also driven by indirect drivers of change that come from the social system, right? So the fact that there is human demographic changes, that there are changes in governance, that there are socio-cultural changes, that everyone is now changing their diets, changes in education, changes in norm, all these have direct effect in biodiversity, and they also have different important effects on, I mean, not only on the anthropogenic climate change, but also on biodiversity. So the main idea here is that we cannot look at any of these drivers in isolation, but you have to look at them in together, right? So for example, here there is a case on the fisheries, no? So if you look at fisheries, you can say that they are affected by warming of the ocean, right? So this generates migration of species, it generates erosion in shield building organisms, this leads to the size reduction of the fishes. But in addition to that, you also have other human impacts, the pollution, overfishing, coast development. So together, all these are the ones that have all these big consequences on ecological disruption or more higher cost, the reduction of fisheries, right? So you cannot be, the point is that you cannot be looking only at the climate effects, the effects on the biophysical system, because all these have big effects that go through the biophysical system, go to the human system. So we should be looking at the cascading effects and at the interactions of the climate with other impacts of other drivers of change that happen in the system. So this is important because although we know that the Mediterranean, and we have here is a very vulnerable ecosystem, there is not like a policy approach that merges the system, that merges how to address those from this very combined perspective. For example, if to reduce, in response to changes in rainfall, governments might build dams, right, to stock water and to serve water for agriculture. But if you do that, you are not considering how these dams are affecting the biophysical system, the physical system, and how this is affecting people living downstream. So all the policies that are done to address climate change should take into consideration the other aspects of the system, particularly the biological and the physical systems, right? And in this graph, we are showing how there are connections between these are the Sustainable Development Goals, they are all connected, and policies that are taken to address one of them might affect the other. And if we don't look at this interaction, we just might find solutions that are good for one thing, but not for the other. Oops, sorry. One of the main ideas of this report, and that is very key to address Mediterranean policies, is that that we need to be treating the climate, the biodiversity, and the human systems as coupled systems. Because otherwise, I mean, if we reach policies that treat them together, we can be having policies that we call co-beneficial, having benefits both for the environment, the climate, and society, but otherwise we can be reaching policies that have good effects for one, but bad for the other, or worse, that they are having bad effects in all them. An example here where I was trying to show. This is a map of sea level rise, right? And we see how this is a Mediterranean and expected sea level rise this is already trends in sea level rise, not expected, but already happening. And we can see that this affects different countries in different ways, right? So having policies that don't consider that in these countries, there are different vulnerabilities and different social situations are going to lead to more migrations, to more displacements, to destroy of tourist employments, right? Because the sea level rise, it doesn't happen only on the shore, it happens in countries with different political situations, with different political vulnerabilities, and it has to be taken into account when we approach those. So just to conclude before Clara cuts me off, any effort to govern the Mediterranean socio-ecological system under a climate change context, to me or to us that we wrote this piece, needs to have three characteristics. One, it needs to be a pan-Mediterranean approach where we are looking at the whole region, not only our small piece of the world. It has to acknowledge that the way we look at climate, or the way we try to address climate with adaptation or mitigation policies, that's going to have impacts in biodiversity and in society. So we should be looking beyond climate in how we adapt. We should be looking at the potential interactions, and we should also be the same when we treat with nature, no? What's the effect for nature solutions in the impact on climate? And the other big conclusion, or the other big point that I want to make, is that any policy should be based in inter and transdisciplinary knowledge. Natural scientists alone don't have solutions. Social scientists alone don't have solution. Local actors, local people, indigenous people don't have all the solution. It's all by working together with this transdisciplinary and interdisciplinary and looking at different knowledge systems that we can find potential solutions to address the challenges. So this is what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. I find very interesting the fact that everyone has to get together and speak, which sometimes is what's more difficult. We'll talk about this later. I think that's an interesting point. Just to remind everyone, each one of the panelists have 15 minutes to speak. I know maybe we were a bit longer, but that's the main thing. And then everyone that's present, if you want to write down questions so that in the end you can ask some of them to the panelists, okay? So now if he's ready, I think he is. Mr. Alain Safa, yeah? And introduce him. He's our second panelist that's going to intervene today. He's the founder and manager of Skill Partners and president of the MAFI International, and he will give us an overview of the socio-economic impacts of climate change on water, agriculture, and food, the three of them being very necessary for our survival. So it will be a quite interesting point of view. So, Mr. Alain, welcome. My question would be, how will our location or profession mark the way climate change will affect us, and why do you think that will be? And if certain countries, from your point of view in the Mediterranean, are more risk than others, and I think is what you're going to talk to us about. Thank you for being here.
Okay, thank you, Clara. Thank you for the organizers, and thank you for your invitations for this interesting events, and in this wonderful occasions about the Day of the Mediterranean. So I'm going to share with you some analysis about the socio-economic impact of the climate change, and I am going to focus about I am going to sharing with you my slide up. Okay. So I'm going to focus my studies about the social economic impact of the climate change only on waters, agricultures, and foods. And as I have limited time, so I'm going to, of course, because my colleagues talk about the impact of the climate change when we talk about rising of temperatures. And my colleagues talk about in the Mediterranean countries, as you can see, we have, it's a very interesting place, the hotspot about what's happening in the world. We have high interesting ecosystems around the Mediterranean Sea, the place of the old civilization, the place of the concentration of the populations, as we can see. And we have 23 countries with different kind of countries. In one side, we have the developed countries in the north of the Mediterranean Sea, and in the south and the east, we have emerging countries, developing countries, and not all of them having the same capacities and impacting by the same way. But of course, all of them are sharing the same place, and then they should find solution. What's important in this place that we have a high growth of the population inside this area, and we are going to explain this connection between a growing population and what's happening about climate change. So the key findings, and I'm not going to develop that because my colleagues and the professors Francisco Doblas talking about that. So I'm just talking about, of course, the climate change is one between the major factor inside, rising of temperatures and the change in the precipitations, as we explained, reducing precipitation between 30 to 40%, as you say before. And of course, we talk about the sea level rise is very important. And of course, that is impacting agriculture's food and waters inside. So I am going to focus about all of them. And I'm going to not to come back about what the IPCC was talking and the different scenarios about the rising of temperatures because you have all the information about it. I am moving about the sea level rise, and I observe that my colleagues talk about a minimum 1 meter, and now you have some scenario talking about 3 meters of the sea rise levels. And of course, it's very important information, because when we talk about the rise sea level, that's meaning reducing the fresh waters coming from the rivers inside the Mediterranean and reducing the use of the fresh waters of the rivers. At the same time, this sea level rise is reducing the area of agriculture's place and then reducing the food capacity of the country inside. So I am going to speak very quickly about only 3 main factors and sectors, and we talk about water sectors, agriculture sectors, and the food sectors. These 3 sectors we talk about, as you know, in economics, we have the basic needs of goods, of services, and we have, of course, the secondary needs. So when we talk about the basic human needs, that's meaning we need waters, we need food, and then we need agriculture, and that's why they are the main drivers of the humanities, and that's why these factors are very important and impacting the surviving population living around this area. So we are starting very quickly with the water sources. So my analysis is coming in economic side always, because we are in market economies, and also it's very interesting way to see how the change are coming about these sectors. We analyze by supply and the demand. So if we come to the water resources, we considering with higher temperatures, of course, the climate is going to change, because we talk about the climate change. This climate change, we observe that we are going to have some decreasings of the flow of waters, as we talk, reducing precipitation, and it's up about the level of the global warmings, but whatever the levels, of course, we are going to have decreasings of precipitation. The second, we talk about, as we observe in the Mediterranean countries, we have some difference between the north and the south. So the southern Mediterranean countries are more impacting than the north in this kind of supply of fresh waters. And as I explained before, the rising of the sea level is reducing the fresh waters of the rivers and reducing the quantity of waters inside the rivers also. Now, what's important in the Mediterranean area is the growing and exponential demand of waters. So we need more waters for the irrigations of agricultural place. And as we have less precipitation, that's meaning we need more waters to irrigate the agricultural place. We need more waters because we have growing populations. We need waters for the human needs. And of course, the needs is growing inside the south of the Mediterranean, because the population became more and more important in the south and the east of the Mediterranean, if we compare to the north of the Mediterranean, when we have some stable population size. So this growing population, and as you can see in this presentation, we talk about today, we are 5 to 5.4% of the world population, but we expect it to move to 660 million of inhabitants around the Mediterranean by 2050. That's meaning we talk about the next 30 years, and the size of the population is increasing to 6.8. That's meaning the growth rate population in the Mediterranean, around the Mediterranean countries, is more important than the average growth population in the world. And of course, we talk about other demand of waters is coming from the recreational area. As you know, the Mediterranean Sea is the first tourism destination, and we need waters for that, as you can see, and we need to keep the services of the tourism around the Mediterranean area. So some word about the expectation, if we come back to that. Of course, according to the World Bank estimation, the GDP is impacting by the high water stress, that's meaning less and less of precipitation, is impacting around 71% of the GDP of the Mediterranean countries and 61% of the population, so living around the Mediterranean Sea. That's meaning really it's very important problem problems. And if we compare to the average of the population in the world and the average GDP impacted in the world, so as you can see, we are so 3 times more or 2 times more than other countries. If we look about the famous, when we talk about stress water of the population and water poor population, so are very important when we have less than 1,000 meter cube by years by habitants. And of course, we are in this place, we are more than the third of the population are impacting by this kind. And we need more and more waters, of course, for the irrigation and for the need of the agricultural food. So that's why analyzing the water resources, that's meaning we observe that we have stress of waters. And of course, this one is impacting the second sectors. Because when we come back to the second sectors about agricultures, as you know, no agricultures without waters. And the first place of agricultures starting next to the place where we have waters and when we have good climate for that. And that's why we talk about climate change is impacting by double way the agricultural sectors. First, higher temperatures and less precipitation, and that's meaning we talk about a growing need of waters. At the same things, climate change is going to reduce the quantity of waters and to reduce the productivity of the land to produce agricultures, and is impacting, as my colleagues, so Victoria Reyes talking about the ecological impact and about the biodiversities, and then we talk about the climate change is reducing the productivities of the agricultural lands, and of course we talk about the capacity to produce agricultures is negatively impacted following the climate change, even if it's not the only factors impacting biodiversity, because we talk about other factors coming from human activities. So if we look about the supply in the agricultural sectors, supply we can consider, as we explained, scarcity of waters impacting the agricultural size. Second, we talk about the change in the farming models. And as we have less and less of waters, and as the price of water is going to increase, so more and more of agricultors are going to substitute some product by others. We substitute valuable products by others one, like for example, when we change corn by sorghum, and then we talk about the income level of the population is decreasing because we are going to substitute high value products by lower value. And second, we talk about the nutritional intake of these products, of this new production is going to decrease. And at the same time, we have the population is increasing that. And that's why we talk about the huge impact in agricultural sectors, but also in the population working inside the agricultural sectors. And the southern Mediterranean countries, we have in average 34% of the population are working in the agricultural sectors, and any change about their income is impacting very important part of the population living inside. In the side of the demand, we find the same analysis than before. We have a growing population, that's meaning we need growing need of agricultures for this population, and of course this population will not be able to produce all what they need. And that's why whatever the size of the agricultural sectors, some countries, especially in the south of the Mediterranean, are net importers of agricultural products. Net importers of agricultural products, that's meaning we need to buy them from other countries, we need to import that. And now the big problem that not all the countries are able to find resources to pay this import of agricultures, because you need to have foreign currency. And when you start to have problems about your foreign exchange, that's meaning you are not able to buy the basic need of the population. And less agricultural products, that's meaning less primary needs, that's meaning social and political tensions. And of course, with the climate change, investing inside the agricultural area became less and less important. So we have less and less investment inside, lower productivities, and of course, lower income for the population working inside. So when we come to the last sectors, and this one is connected to the agricultures, of course, and connected to the waters, and decreasing in the agricultural products, that's meaning always decreasing in the food sectors. And of course, in the food sectors, we include inside livestock products. And when we talk about pâturage one, and also we include the famous fishery sectors. And this one also is impacting by the climate change. So always, and we continue our analysis, supply and demand analysis. In the kind of the supply, as you can see, and especially in the fish sectors, we have 78% of the fish stock in the Mediterranean are caught at unsustainable level. That's meaning we talk about catching small species and not letting enough of species to regenerate that for the next generation. And then the production of fish in the Mediterranean is decreasing with the times. And as the quantity of fish is decreasing with the time, of course, the revenue of people working in the fish industry is decreasing, and the quantity of fish to nurture the population living around is decreasing with the times. As you can see, the size of the population working in the fish sectors, we have 227,000 of fishermen. And of course, the most important part of them are living in Morocco and in Egypt, the two major countries in the thousands of Mediterranean countries. And of course, any change in the fish stocks is impacting the population living inside. So that's why it's very important to focus about that, about the fish sectors. And as you know, the ocean acidifications, as you know, the climate change is impacting the kind of species living inside the Mediterranean, and also the human activities. When we talk about unsustainable level of fish is impacting the quantity of fish inside. So that's why we talk about this situation became more and more dangerous for the population. And at the same time, of course, always a growing demand of foods coming from different things. And now when we observe what's happening, we're considering that this growing demand of food is impacting the poor population, because only the categories of the population who are able to pay higher prices will be able to have access to this food, and all the population not having the right income will not be able to find what they need, and then they are reducing the quantity of food for them. And we talk about problems of nutritional one, and then healthy systems for this population is going to be impacted with this kind of evolution. So that's why we talk about in this thing of fishing industry, some studies talk about, if we look about the value, even if the value is impacting, but as the price is going to increase, some studies talk about the price is going to compensate the quantity of fish reducing one. But the problems, maybe some industry or some employers will survive with the growing price, even if the quantity is decreasing, but the population working inside will be impacted, whatever the scenario, even if the price is increasing, and having some compensation about the revenue of the industry working in this place. It's the same analysis for the fishing industry or the food industry or the agriculture industry. So the expectation, when we talk about that, of course, we need to import more foods. So food coming from agricultural products. So when we talk about animal products, or when we talk about fish products, all of them constitute what we call the need of food for the population, and growing need, that's meaning growing import. And as the prices became more and more important, not all the people will be able to have access to this important kind of food. And then we talk about always social and political tension inside the countries, not able to have access to that, and of course more poverties. And if we continue to analyze like that, more poverties and social and political tension, that's meaning It's like the push factors in the migrant flow. And of course, if the Mediterranean countries in the north are less impacting than the south, so we talk about push factors to push the population to move from the south to the north. So to be able to analyze, to focus about my point of view about these studies, very quickly, my analysis in that when we talk about demand and supply, and to allow you to understand what I am going to talk about it. So always in supply and demand, when we talk about the quantity and price, it's the same analysis for waters, for agricultures, and for the food products. We have, as you can see, so the famous supply, as you can see, is vertical one. That's meaning whatever the price, the supply is not changing because it's up about the climate condition, it's up about the resources that we have, and that is not changing like other sectors coming from the price. So with the climate change, we talk about negative shock in the supply because we observe that we are going to have less and less of waters, less and less of food, and less of agricultural products. And of course, at the same time, we talk about positive shock in the size of the demand. And in this way, we talk about a growing price and decreasing the quantity available of food, of waters, and agricultures. And when we observe that in the short run, that's meaning we talk about the medium run, that's meaning the next 10 years, 20 years, of course, we have the change. Now, if we continue to 2050 and to the end of the centuries, and we talk about very long run, so evolution, of course, the negative shock on the supply will be so huge, and the positive shock of the demand continue to increase because we observe the population will continue and the need of the population is going to grow. And of course, by the end, we are going to observe really very high level of prices, and then less and less of the population will have access to this product. And at the same time, we have short of quantity as we can observe. So higher prices and lower quantity is the main observation that we are able to see about it. So as the time is limited, I am not going to repeat what I observe about the waters and agriculture's problems and how they are going to be impacted. And of course, the reducing of the wetland and the extension of the dry lands and the marine ecosystems, so that my colleagues develop about it. I am focusing especially about the risk about human life coming from the extreme events, the population vulnerability, the food shortage, migration, conflicts in this Mediterranean area, and especially about policy recommendation, and it's my last slide. So we can observe in the policy recommendation that we need to find solution. First, we should start by dealing with the driver of the climate change. Mitigation or adaptation, it's up about what we are able to see. But for the agricultures, waters, and the food sectors, we should deal with the supply side and with the demand side. And of course, we should also deal with the supply, that's meaning help and support the increasing of the supply. And we should also deal with how to deal with the demand in the side. And what's really we observe in the Mediterraneans and what we need is to share experience between all Mediterranean countries around. We share the skills of the countries, the experience of all this country, the famous know-how of all the country inside. And as you explained well during the last presentation, climate risk is international issue, it's regional challenge, it's collective responsibilities, and of course the solution come always with international, regionals, and of course the cooperation between all this country and especially between all the Mediterranean country for that. Thank you to listening, and I am waiting to any questions, and I will be happy to answer to the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Safa. We'll come back to you in the debate. Well, I'll introduce you to Ms. Soplaki. Sorry, I'm missing my point. She's acting head of climatology, climate dynamics, and climate change at the Department of Geography and Center of International Development at the Justus Liebig University of Gießen. And well, the question would be, how important is it for scientific community to work together in order to reduce the gap between global and local knowledge on climate change? Just take the floor.
Thank you very much. If you could please change to my presentation. So thank you very much for the introduction. I'm really glad being here. And yeah, exactly. Thank you very much. So I would like to present to you the work that we have done together with Irina Solovieva on the gaps and the challenges that the assessment of socioeconomic impacts of climate change are facing. And we have taken the case of the Mediterranean as an example of this work. Okay, I should be able to change.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. So climate change, as we know, is global, affects the environment and presents challenges for human well-being. Climate change impact research usually deals with the effects of climate change on human societies, and the analysis of these impacts often includes sectors like agriculture, food security, water resources, human health, security issues, energy, and transport. Depending on whether the impact analysis is made on a global or on a regional level, the level of detail and focus vary. For example, sectors of great importance for the Mediterranean would be tourism or impact on coastal areas, among other sectors and areas that are of great importance for our region. Addressing the socioeconomic impacts of climate change is challenging and complicated. Consider, for example, the complex interactions between our climate, the environment, and us humans. In climate research, we are very much interested and focus our work on the attribution of climate change. In the case of those assessments, the attribution of socioeconomic impacts on climate change only is almost impossible, and this is due to the complex interactions and feedbacks between these spheres and realms. The preparation of such assessments is crucial as they predict future anthropogenic impacts and develop well-informed, appropriate, and suitable policy responses that help mitigating the negative impacts on the environment and the socioeconomic sectors. Global, regional, national, and local assessments with high integration that consider a long list of impacts and factors, or in-depth studies with specific foci aim to inform policy and decision management making and rely on quantitative approaches as costs and benefits are extremely important at all policy decision levels. These studies integrate the complex nature of climate change as its impact, and still they suffer at the same time from methodological issues such as high uncertainty. These studies have also to respond to the challenges of the heterogeneous regional socioeconomic conditions. The same studies are expected to provide answers and estimates that enable decision makers to prepare appropriate policy solutions at all levels. We have selected the example of the Mediterranean, and that due to its high susceptibility to the risk of climate change impact, and that due to water scarcity, concentration of economic activities in coastal areas, reliance on climate-sensitive agriculture, among other factors. Our area, at the same time, goes through intensive demographic, social, cultural, economic, environmental, and climate and climate changes that overcome those at the global scale. I'm a little bit wondering. Yes, exactly. So the assessment reports, the IPCC assessment reports that Paco was talking about at the beginning, incorporate a methodology that represents the complexity of climate change and interlinks biophysical changes with related socioeconomic impacts. The integrated assessment modeling addresses the socioeconomic impacts of climate, and that through introduction of the costs of climate change in the analysis for a set of the shared socioeconomic pathways. The application of the integrated modeling has the potential to visualize multiple futures under various policy options and to integrate assessments of impacts and costs in one modeling framework. These studies have also drawbacks or challenges, and one among those is scale. The global scale of the scenarios and the actual knowledge gap we do have between the global climate change and the regional or local impacts of humans and ecosystems pose questions, great challenges and inconsistencies among the global assessments and the specific regional or national decisions on climate change policies and actions. More targeted assessments, which are disaggregated to the regions and countries, or even more higher resolution, are required, especially for areas such as the Mediterranean. Areas with this great heterogeneity of the natural systems and the variance of the different population groups and their climate change vulnerability. Another important point is the necessity of rich socioeconomic context for regional and local scales, also in the scenarios. The social contexts, values, and perceptions are crucial and define both vulnerability, adaptation, but also the adoption of mitigation actions, their acceptance at the end. At the same time, population behavior is not yet integrated in the scenarios. Of course, this information requires much more extensive data and also their appropriate translation to indicators, which is indeed related to another major challenge that these assessments have to deal with. There are a couple of options to incorporate social aspects, and one of those would be to engage various stakeholders at the very beginning into the scenarios development and storylines, which will further link more actors to the impact assessment procedure and thereby broaden the applicability of these outcomes to many more decision makers. Finally, existing knowledge gaps within the integrated assessment modeling approaches relate to underlying mechanisms that are not yet well defined, or even more, they're not even yet established. Links of empirical knowledge to the modeling framework are missing, and these are important, especially in the fields of vulnerability, adaptation, and mitigation. Assessments that relate weather variables with socioeconomic outcomes can improve our understanding of underlying mechanisms, and thus to improve the accuracy of the socioeconomic analysis. Local and regional case studies can support filling those gaps and can also modify the scenario development processes. An example is the impact of climate change on the agricultural sector, what we heard just before. The effect is not restricted only on the yield quantity, but it is extrapolated also to its quality, which means to the nutrient content and micronutrients. That is not only influencing the price of the agricultural produce, but has implications for human nutrition quality and consequently human public health. Many integrated studies base their analysis on existing censuses that contain traditional socioeconomic data, which are collected for various purposes. They are thus missing data specific for climate change impact. Such information does not allow accurate and useful assessments. Identification of the required variables and comprehensive databases that include climate data would support in this direction. Issues of data collection arise through the different procedures that are applied at different countries, and the varying spatial resolution reduces the applicability to the local level. At the same time, the differences to the high-resolution environmental data do limit the effectiveness of the assessments. A consensus among countries and standardization approaches with higher spatial resolution can improve applicability and effectiveness of the assessments. Climate impact assessments are currently used to inform the policymakers and at the national, regional, and sometimes national levels. However, the nature of the climate change challenges, the need to take decisions at the local level, and even more, the need for social transformation require well-informed stakeholders at all levels, from households to businesses and civil society, in order to understand and also support the need for transformation. This can be made with a closer link between the climate impact assessments and the population groups and stakeholders through, for example, a web-based climate change impact and vulnerability assessment platform that is addressing various sectors, including environmental data relevant for this work. A further measure may relate with a World Climate Research Programme lighthouse activity, My Climate Risk, which will develop a framework for assessing and explaining regional climate risk and deliver climate information that is meaningful at the local scale in order to construct decision-relevant and scale-relevant information. I would like to go to the end, which you might have been seeing already some time now, and I would like to close with what could improve the quality and applicability of those of climate change impact assessments by addressing the methodological and data challenges that I described in a systematic and coordinated manner. And even more when we're looking into the Mediterranean basin, collaboration between researchers who are studying all these aspects of climate change and are taking into consideration the complexities, inhomogeneities, and socioeconomic gradients present in the Mediterranean basin could support this improvement of quality and effectiveness. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Soplaki. And last but not least, let me introduce you to Mr. Joan Subirats, Professor of Political Science and Researcher at the Institute of Government and Public Policy at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And he will speak from the other point of view. We've seen the scientific point of view, but it's interesting to know the government or the policy-making point of view too. So you have the floor.
Thank you. Y muchas gracias por invitarme. No tengo presentación y además he preparado mi presentación en castellano, o sea que voy a cambiar un poco el estilo de presentación anterior. Ante todo, dar las gracias a Liemer y a Prima por esta invitación. A Clave Quintana me invitó a participar ya en la publicación y también en esta sesión. Yo creo que tenemos suficientes evidencias a lo largo de esta sesión como para pensar que estamos ante un problema que parece evidente y que también parece claro que, digamos, el tipo de solución a aplicar, lo hemos visto, ¿no? Pues en muchos casos sería un cambio bastante notable en las formas de hacer, de producir, Es decir, estamos ante una aparente contradicción, ¿no? Entre un problema que antes se ha comentado por parte del doctor Francisco Doblas como que no se puede discutir, es indiscutible, ¿no? El grado de acuerdo, y al mismo tiempo la sensación de parálisis en la que estamos ante este tipo de problemas, ¿no? Yo creo que hemos de darnos cuenta seguramente que aplicando la lógica de las políticas públicas, que es mi campo de actuación, no está clara la definición de problema. O sea, no hay un acuerdo colectivo sobre esa definición de problema. O sea, no podemos seguramente desde el punto de vista científico considerar que es indiscutible la definición del problema planteado, desde el punto de vista de las ciencias ambientales, por ejemplo, pero no creo que se pueda, digamos, utilizar el mismo argumento cuando hablamos de la capacidad de comprensión social que existe sobre este tema, ¿no? Es curioso, por ejemplo, si analizamos las últimas encuestas de Pew Research, ¿no?, que es un gran analista de opinión pública a nivel mundial, que los países donde la democracia hoy está más bien valorada en el mundo, aparte de los países nórdicos que siempre aparecen, son India, Indonesia y Filipinas, con índices de crecimiento previstos del 6, 7, 8, 9%, es decir, con pocas posibilidades actualmente de imaginar que tendrán escenarios de crecimiento que puedan de alguna manera incorporarse al diagnóstico que aquí estamos haciendo en relación a los países del Mediterráneo, ¿no? Y en cambio, los países del Mediterráneo, los niveles de satisfacción con la democracia son los más bajos de la Unión Europea, ¿no? Tanto en España como en Italia como en Grecia. O sea, realmente, digamos, hay unos desajustes, mires por donde lo mires, en relación a la aparente, digamos, univocidad, ¿no?, del problema, y en cambio la dificultad en encontrar políticas. Claro, podemos dar la respuesta de lo que falta es, digamos, decisión política fuerte, ¿no?, capaz de imponer o de tirar adelante políticas determinadas. Pero la duda está en si los políticos no actúan de esta manera por voluntad propia o porque no creen que la demanda social que existe sobre esta solución es realmente significativa, amplia y mayoritaria. Porque si fuera amplia, socialmente mayoritaria, etcétera, probablemente los políticos tendrían interés en responder a esa demanda. Y aquí es donde encontramos uno de los puntos clave, yo creo, de mi visión en este tema, que es el gap que existe entre la capacidad de diagnóstico de la ciencia sobre estos problemas y la capacidad de compartir ese diagnóstico con la sociedad, ¿no? Es decir, el avance de la ciencia es muy rápido, no siempre es unívoco en sus conclusiones, por otro lado, ¿no?, a pesar de que en este caso el consenso es amplísimo, pero luego tenemos gaps muy importantes a la hora de la diseminación y la de la divulgación científica, ¿no? Ahora se está hablando mucho, y creo que es importantísimo, de ciencia abierta o de ciencia ciudadana, que son dos elementos que no es que sean nuevos, pero crecientemente están apareciendo como elementos centrales en el avance científico, porque sin esa incorporación de la posibilidad de abrir la ciencia, que no esté solamente contenido en los journals, ¿no? Hay esa famosa, digamos, estadística que dice que el 80% de los artículos en journals solamente lo leen pues los autores y los dos evaluadores que han leído los journals, ¿no? Pero dejando de lado este dato, lo que es evidente es que en ciencia abierta esto facilita muchísimo las cosas, y ahora empieza a haber, incluso desde el punto de vista de los decisores públicos, la capacidad de invertir para que esos artículos puedan estar en ciencia abierta, lo cual es una novedad, ¿no? Podríamos incluso discutir si no cabría hacer un paso más, pero sobre todo también la idea de la ciencia ciudadana, de la cual tenemos aún pocos ejemplos, pero de la que creo que es muy importante porque implica incorporar a las personas también, a la sociedad, a los colectivos, en los procesos de definición. Yo en la aportación que he hecho en el artículo pongo una tabla que es un cuadro que es típico en políticas públicas, que por un lado está el grado de acuerdo sobre los objetivos y por otro lado el grado de acuerdo sobre los medios. Cuando el grado de acuerdo sobre objetivos es muy alto y el grado de acuerdo sobre los medios a utilizar es muy alto, estamos ante lo que llamaríamos una decisión racional, que es aquella que normalmente están los libros que encuentras en los aeropuertos o las estaciones que dice cómo decidir bien en 10 días, ¿no? Este tipo, digamos, de planteamiento. No estamos aquí, digamos, ¿no? Estamos en una situación en la cual hay una gran discusión sobre los instrumentos a utilizar y además no hay un consenso social claro del conjunto de actores sobre realmente la gravedad y la intensidad del problema. Por lo tanto, estaríamos en el cuadro no tanto en programación como en aprendizaje social. O, si queremos ser, digamos, un poco más generosos, en procesos de experimentación o de negociación. Que yo creo que son los tres elementos, o sea, si descartamos el de decisión racional, el de la programación, estaríamos más bien hablando de negociación, procesos de experimentación y procesos de aprendizaje social, que creo que es donde realmente hemos de intentar trabajar desde el punto de vista de las estrategias a desarrollar, porque, repito, como hemos visto de manera muy clara en todas las intervenciones, el nivel de acuerdo científico de los científicos, digamos, de las ciencias naturales, también de las ciencias, digamos, experimentales, incluso de las ciencias sociales, es altísimo, pero en cambio el nivel de capacidad de intervención es bajo, ¿no? Además, si esto lo aplicamos en la cuenca mediterránea, iré rápido, Clara, si esto lo aplicamos en la cuenca mediterránea, vemos que el problema se incrementa mucho más, porque es una zona, como se ha dicho, densamente habitada desde siempre, que concentra no solamente habitantes, sino también visitantes. Se calculan unos 400 millones de turistas al año, que se agregarían a los 550 que viven en esa zona, que tiene problemas de una dimensión enorme, como se ha visto aquí. Los que yo señalaba en mi artículo pues eran agua, alimentación, residuos y turismo que han ido apareciendo, y que además concentra, que no tengo por qué insistir en ello, problemas políticos, religiosos, sociales, de grandes desigualdades, económicos y demográficos, ¿no? Como también se ha visto en la intervención de Alain Safar. Es decir, tenemos la sensación, yo creo, al menos tengo la sensación de que no podemos aislar los problemas, no podemos aislar el problema ambiental del resto, pero al mismo tiempo, si incorporamos todos los problemas, quedamos bloqueados. O sea, la situación es un poco, digamos, contradictoria, ¿no? Porque si incorporamos simplicidad a un problema complejo, no avanzamos. Y si digamos, partimos de la complejidad global, nos quedamos bloqueados, porque parece muy difícil actuar, ¿no? ¿Cómo avanzar, no? Yo no tengo una solución mágica, ¿no? Lo que sí creo es que deberíamos ser capaces, tanto en los procesos de negociación como los de experimentación, con los de aprendizaje social, ser capaces de generar visiones compartidas, evitando algo que es típico de las políticas ambientales, que son generalmente de carácter regulativo, ¿no? O sea, la división clásica en políticas públicas habla de políticas redistributivas, políticas distributivas y políticas regulativas. Las políticas redistributivas son de conflicto político tradicional. Lo que uno gana, los otros pierden. Yo saco de un sector social para dárselo a otro, ¿no? Son las políticas sociales características, tradicionales. Las políticas distributivas son aquellas que aman más los políticos, porque de alguna manera tú inviertes, ¿no? Incorporas una nueva biblioteca, un nuevo un gimnasio, una pista deportiva, los costes están difusos, los beneficios concentrados. Las políticas regulativas son precisamente las más difíciles de abordar, porque son políticas en las cuales los costes están concentrados y los beneficios difusos. Es decir, tú aplicas una política regulativa, prohíbes tal cosa, ¿quién se va a quejar? ¿No? Esto lo decía Maquiavelo ya en El Príncipe, pues se va a quejar aquellos que están afectados, digamos, directamente por esa política. Los potenciales beneficiarios de esa política no saben que estarán beneficiados por esa política y por lo tanto difícilmente los puedes movilizar. Y además en el caso ambiental no es aquello que digas, bueno, mañana prohíbo la circulación de coches por Barcelona y al día siguiente la gente dice, ¿cómo se respira bien? Algo de prueba hemos visto en el caso de la pandemia, ¿no? O sea, en este caso hemos podido ver, pero claro, no sé si el experimento permitiría ir por esa línea, ¿no? Bien, entonces yo creo que tendríamos que buscar más elementos. Primero, lo he dicho, más debate científico y ciudadano, más divulgación, más experiencias de compartir este tipo de conocimiento con la gente desde el terreno, desde el sector, más experiencias piloto que generen éxito, sobre las cuales se pueda construir conocimiento y sobre las cuales puedes hacer divulgación, hacer benchmarking, Tercer elemento, más proximidad. Es muy distinto, creo, reunir a los alcaldes de Cairo, Atenas, Argel, Barcelona y Nápoles. He cogido estos 5 por casualidad. Reunirlos porque si los reúnes, al cabo de 5 minutos van a hablar de las mismas cosas. Porque las ciudades todas se parecen. Van a hablar de movilidad, van a hablar de residuos, van a hablar de contaminación. Si tú reúnes a los 5 jefes de Estado de esas 5 ciudades, van a tardar una semana en saber si el régimen es digamos, constitucional, es monárquico, es republicano. Las distancias desde el punto de vista de Estado-Nación son enormes en comparación con la proximidad que hay desde el punto de vista del territorio, ¿no? No digo ciudad, cuando digo ciudad puedo decir territorio, ¿no? Entonces, en ese sentido, para mí, y esto se vio en Glasgow, la capacidad rapidísima, como el C40 tuvo capacidad de reunirse y buscar rápidamente alternativas que fueran comunes, y las dificultades enormes que tuvieron los estados a la hora de plantearlo. Por lo tanto, yo creo que el factor proximidad sería un factor importante. Y finalmente, el hacer procesos abiertos, procesos más participativos, no tecnocráticos. Uno de los graves problemas que tenemos con el tema ambiental es que tiene una dimensión técnica muy alta. Y esto hace que sea fácil que, digamos, caigamos en situaciones de incomprensión, ¿no? Los gilets jaunes en Francia, digamos, las reacciones que hay frente a la incorporación de la zona de bajas emisiones, porque el señor que tenía un diésel, que le dijeron que se compraba un diésel hace 15 años, diciéndole que era fantástico, que era barato y que le duraría muchos años, y ahora dices que no lo puede utilizar, pues él no ha llegado a esta conclusión y no ve que ese coche realmente llegue a esa conclusión, tenga esos efectos tan negativos. Por lo tanto, yo creo que también el hacer más procesos abiertos, incorporar complejidad social a una definición que es de carácter tan técnico es importante. Y finalmente, tener en cuenta, porque creo que esto es evidente y se ha dicho también, incorporar una lógica de justicia ambiental. ¿Qué quiere decir justicia ambiental? Tener en cuenta los impactos desiguales que la aplicación de estas políticas, que son no niego que sean necesarias en absoluto, estoy totalmente de acuerdo con el diagnóstico, pero que la implementación de esas políticas, ser muy consciente de los efectos desiguales que tienen y, por lo tanto, digamos, de alguna manera ser capaz de incorporar no solamente políticas regulativas, sino políticas redistributivas, políticas distributivas que acompañen esas políticas regulativas. En definitiva, yo creo que hemos de tener en cuenta que desde el punto de vista de la situación de la democracia hoy en el mundo y de los países en general, el nivel de sufrimientos genera lógicas, reacciones muy emocionales, que están muy alejadas del tipo de planteamiento técnico que estamos incorporando. Por lo tanto, si no somos capaces de incorporar esa dimensión también emocional a los planteamientos que estamos planteando, seguramente las posibilidades de rechazo sean importantes, porque recordemos que políticamente hay una distancia significativa entre el corto plazo y el largo plazo. Es importante también entender que las generaciones que van a sufrir más esos efectos no votan, y las generaciones que más votan precisamente son las generaciones que tienen una dimensión temporal más corta. Me estoy incorporando yo en esa dimensión porque tengo 70 años, pero, digamos, hay un desajuste entre, digamos, el efecto sombra que las decisiones actuales tienen sobre el futuro y la capacidad de presión que las generaciones tienen también sobre esos efectos. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Joan Subirats. Se nos ha ido un poco el tiempo, entonces tenemos una pregunta del chat, ¿vale? Que será la primera que haremos, así, sorry, in English. Bueno, la primera que preguntaré también a la mesa. Entonces vamos a ver si no hay más preguntas presenciales. Hacemos un poco de debate sobre lo que habéis dicho, que todo es muy interesante, ¿vale? Hay muchos puntos de vista. Así que, bueno, the question is in English, is by Fanny Hajina. She says, biodiversity is great in the Mediterranean. In terms of food security, we talk mainly for the biodiversity of pollinators, the service for food production, and the sustainability of farming agronomy, beekeeping professions. Sorry, I didn't quite do the pronunciation right. And what the countries could do in that direction. So the beekeeping professions and farming and agronomy. It would be great to elaborate on that level a bit. Thank you. And sorry, Fanny, because thank you for your question. So I don't know if maybe Victoria or...
No, I mean, the issue that, I mean, biodiversity has been, my point, the point I wanted to make is that biodiversity, there are two types of biodiversity, domesticated biodiversity, wild biodiversity. So humans have contributed greatly to improve both wild biodiversity and domesticated biodiversity, and we rely on both. Obviously, countries in the Mediterranean and in other regions faced with human population growth, they are moving to kind of like homogenizing agriculture and the food production sector, because they're like, I mean, it's easier, it's less, you can mechanize, no? So there are all these changes that have effects both in biodiversity and in how the countries structure their work. So obviously policies that take into account, and in Europe in general, no, the move to more agroecology is in that direction, no? How we actually make agriculture, and not only agriculture, but food production systems, right, pastoralism, that are in harmony or that maintain the diversity, right? So you produce, at the same time you get the agriculture, I mean the food that the countries, that people need, and maintain biodiversity. But it's kind of like we have gone through this valley, no, where we have organized the production of food in a way that is very intensive and resource dependent, and in fossil fuels and mechanized, etc. And now that we realize that we have kind of like exhausted nature, we are trying to change, or countries are trying to change, or at least in theory, this agriculture. It will be great, as she said, it will be great that there is more of this, because obviously I think agriculture in itself, it needs 23% of the gas emissions in the world, and it occupies 23% or 25% of the land on Earth. So if we could compatibilize, no, the agriculture with the biodiversity, rather than having monocultures, it could be a beneficial. That's the type of policies that could be co-beneficial both for biodiversity and for climate mitigation.
I think, and one of the interesting things that, well, it's been mentioned overall, is the local point of view, and I think Mr. Subirats mentioned it. Well, each one of you, even Mr. Safa online, mentioned it, and I think maybe going back to this COP26 this year, you mentioned it before, the understanding between cities and not between countries, because it's more difficult. That was one of the questions that they've done also. What would be your view on these results of the COP26, you know, because it is the next step, isn't it? And it is an agreement between countries, and we are talking about the difficulty to make decisions, because they have to be more local or more regional, because the national just aren't enough, and the international are too big. So how do you see these the results of this COP26?
Bueno, desde mi punto de vista debería haber una combinación de lo internacional, o sea, las lógicas internacionales son muy importantes, las supranacionales, para romper precisamente bloqueos de carácter nacional, ¿no? Por lo tanto, desde el punto de vista internacional, yo creo que es importante que haya una lógica tanto de impulsora de conocimiento como de regulación también, ¿no? Porque en muchos casos los países utilizan como alibi, ¿no?, el hecho de la regulación internacional, y por lo tanto han de aplicar una regulación que va por encima de los lobbies del propio país, porque se les ha impuesto, por así decirlo, desde lógicas supranacionales, y esto facilita la incorporación de ciertas políticas. Si esto va acompañado de algo que también se ha dicho antes, ¿no?, por parte de Victoria, que es la capacidad de recuperación de formas tradicionales de gestión y de ponerlas al día, esas lógicas, porque consiguieron en momentos determinados combinar muy bien la sustentabilidad con el medio ambiente. Yo creo que eso serían también elementos a considerar. Por lo tanto, no creo que solamente convenga, por así decirlo, descentralizar. Conviene descentralizar en algunos casos y centralizar en otros, ¿no? Una combinación de políticas creo que sería interesante.
And related to, bueno, en relación, ¿no?, a esto, la COP26, ¿no?, que al final marca el framework, ¿no? O sea, nos dice dónde trabajar, desde dónde posicionarnos los países, desde dónde empezar a trabajar, pero que no acaba marcando ninguna política concreta, ¿no? Que aquí sí que hay mucho trabajo de países y luego también de ciudades, obviamente, que son las que están delante de este problema, como podemos ver en Barcelona, ¿no?, con ejemplos que has mencionado como el tema de la movilidad, ¿no?, y cambios que se tienen que aplicar sin igual tener el consenso social, que también es una de las partes importantes, ¿no? O sea, ¿cómo lo veis vosotros también?
Yeah.
Elena.
Yeah, thank you. I was expecting to finish the translation.
I'm sorry.
With respect to COP26, I have to admit that I am less optimistic. I see it on the half-empty way of the glass, not on the half full. I think we had, or the politicians had the possibility to make a big step, and on the very last moment they didn't do it. I think that it was really clear when at the end the president of the session, he tried to keep the dream of the 1.5 degrees alive, but still, barely alive. And I think that this is also very much connected to what you were describing before, and then when everybody of us was saying here, the differences between the scales, the regional scale, the local scale, and also the national and international. I would like to come to the issue of the small island countries. So they are, the scale there is very small, the impacts are really large, and they are just left hanging in a way. And when the whole COP was taking over the suggestions of two countries, and they were not coming to the position to really do the step to take care of these countries who at the very end are those who are not polluting, who are not really causing all these large emissions. So the COP26 was not, to my view, could be better. So I do not know whether in Egypt next year things will improve. Possibly the region will have an impact as well, and Egypt is in any case is facing climate change impact largely. So that hopefully that will make a difference there.
Thank you, Elena. Please. Gerard.
Thank you. Thank you. And maybe I'm not supposed to be answering this, but as I was listening to you, I was trying to interfere myself. And I should say that probably public decisions, we are failing in three main aspects. First one, we are not explaining well enough to the population, the government. So the scientific diagnosis is clear, as has been obviously said, but not all the population is understanding it. Not everybody is so conscious of where we are, where the problem is, that we have to react immediately. So we are failing here. So probably here we need more open government in all levels of administration. Second is that probably we are not implementing the correct public policies. In terms of what Professor Subirats was saying, and I'm not sure if the English translation is correct, so I'm going to use the word in Spanish. We are only or majority using regulatory public policies, regulativas, instead of redistributivas. And here there are some examples that I will go a bit later on. And finally, we are not coordinating. So we need to coordinate the different, we need a multi-level coordination between administrations. Some examples. A small city here in Catalonia, trying to, where the local government is trying to implement a different system of garbage collection. Why? Because they are sensible with what climate change is, no? But the neighbors are totally against this new collection system. Why? Because there's been a missing of right information, no? Second, Barcelona, capital city of Catalonia. The municipality decides to reduce or to make changes in the mobility. But there's been a coordination with the Catalan or with the regional government and with the national. So here in Barcelona, we decide to reduce the lines for traffic, but at the same time, we are giving free motorways in Catalonia. So from one side, people can use the car cheaply, but in the other side, we are telling them not to enter Barcelona by car. And what is worse, are there any alternatives to enter Barcelona for thousands and thousands of people who has to come to the city every morning and leave it every night? So here in the multi-level coordination, we are also failing. So, well, thanks, because in foreign action, and it is what my business currently, we are like trying to promote, and in a regional level, because as a European region and within the different nets of regions that today are acting within the European Union, we have this message. We need to act coordinatedly, and we need power for regions, because as it was been mentioning, citizens are the ones who can apply the most visible policies for the citizens. So probably here we need to reinforce this need for regions to have more power and to work coordinatedly together with the local and the national and international level.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. Okay, so I know we've been, it's a bit late. I just want to ask if there's someone in the room that wants to ask a question, final question, or if not, we'll just end the debate. We have loads to talk about, but we don't have enough time. So, are there any questions in the room? No. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you for attending and for all your interesting work. And well, just I'll introduce Mr. Octavi Quintana and Roger Alviñana to the stage while we go down. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you.
Muy bien, pues muchísimas gracias a todos. Agradecer en primer lugar vuestra asistencia, secretario de Asuntos Exteriores, secretario general adjunto y otras personalidades que nos han acompañado. I would like first of all to praise the exciting cooperation that we have had with Prima on the organization of this event and the publication of this policy study. I will only give, because I know it's very late and we have heard very interesting presentations from public decision makers, also from scientists, so I will keep it very short, and I will only, before giving the final floor to our friend director Octavio Quintana, I will just try to convey three very short messages. First of all, and this is a message more for domestic consumption and is about PRIMA, what PRIMA is and what we can do together. But first of all, I would like to say that we as citizens of the city of Barcelona, we are very lucky to have a program like PRIMA. And sometimes we are not aware of the relevance and the importance that in this case, it's an EU program, but again, it has an intergovernmental dimension. But the importance that these kind of instruments for the Euro-Mediterranean cooperation have, and the fact that the program is based here in Barcelona is an issue that should be better understood by everybody, not only by the public authorities, but also by the citizens. Not because it's PRIMA, and we like PRIMA name, but because of the actions that that PRIMA undertakes and has undertaken since it was launched 3 years ago, more or less 3 years ago. So from our side, as I met, we are of course looking forward to enhancing this cooperation. Now we had a first taste with the publication of this joint policy study. I know that PRIMA is going to try to deepen its interdisciplinary dimension, so that institutions like IMET, that we don't do pure science, but we move rather in the field of social science, we can also take part in your calls. But again, I think that this is the first example of what we can do together, and I do hope that in the future we will be able to work even more. Second message, I said I would be short. Interdisciplinarity. I mean, now Professor Subirats was speaking about open science. I would add diplomacy science. This is another term that is being used quite often. But climate change is clearly one of the very few topics where pure science impacts policymaking nowadays. And this is, of course, this is a very interesting feature, but sometimes it's also difficult. It leads to difficult situations. So we have vivid discussions, important discussions, especially at the multilateral level. And sometimes these discussions are not easily solved. The way forward is to repeat the evidences. This is what we are doing today. I mean, today we presented evidences which in most cases, I mean, in some cases they are new, but in most cases they are not new. It is very important to repeat the evidences underpinned by data. And this has to be done at different levels. I totally uphold the need to open up these debates to civil society at large, not only to the policy-making community. And I know this is a long-term run. This is not going to be solved in 2, 3, 5 years, even though we are really in a rush to bring forward some changes, to modify, well, some changes. But it is a run that we need to continue taking. And finally, the Mediterranean area as a climate change hotspot, as it has been highlighted several times by the MEDEC and the IPCC reports. We are in a region that is warming much faster than the rest of the world's regions. It is a region where precipitation is falling very rapidly, where biodiversity is more threatened than in other parts of the world. We need to be aware of that. We need to repeat that. We need to bring new evidences, new data. And as the Deputy Secretary General Isidro González was saying, it is important to have meetings like the one that the UFM organized this year at the ministerial level, bringing together the 42 ministers of the Euro-Mediterranean region, and I know that we were all very happy because PRIMA was quoted in the ministerial declaration of the UFM Ministerial on the Environment. But as important as it is to have and to hold these meetings, we also need to pay a lot of attention to the implementation of what is being agreed in these meetings, because many times, too often, we are extremely happy by the simple fact that we convey and we convene 42 ministers of the environment, and that's it. We come up with a ministerial declaration. Oh, look, this is what we have been doing. This is what we are committed to be doing in the future. And then we also need to pay attention to the implementation of what is being agreed. So that's why I think that initiatives like the one that we have presented today, this joint initiative of PRIMA and IMF, is of utmost importance. I mean, modestly speaking, but yet we're very happy to cooperate with pure scientists. We are more, as an economist, I often say that I'm more like an artist. I'm more like a social artist. I don't know if Professor Subirats will agree with me. But certainly we are happy and we want to cooperate with pure scientists. And I do hope, as I said in the beginning, that this is going to be the first step of a long-lasting contribution. So I want to thank especially the director, Octavio Quintana, for his leadership in this project and for being in Barcelona, his home city. And I thank you all for being here today. And my last and final words are for my colleagues, Antoine and his team, for the brilliant organization of this event that unfortunately, due to the COVID again, and this is a repeated message also this year, it was a truly hybrid event because we had more people online, following online, than on site. But thank you so much for those who came here. And now I'm delighted to pass the floor on to Octavio Quintana. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Roger, for your words. In fact, I am very pleased, and I think that speaking on behalf of PRIMA, I can say that our collaboration is badly needed. For us, it was very helpful to have you, taking with us in these organizing events. We are very young. We didn't so far organize events of the sort. This is the first one, and certainly your help has been instrumental. Indeed, we want to do more about that. You are working in the Mediterranean. We are working in the Mediterranean as well, from different places and with different instruments, but I think that we are very complementary, and certainly this is very useful that we can do it together. I want also, even if the Union for the Mediterranean is not here, but to thank them, because this is again a complementary organization for us, and certainly the Generalitat de Catalunya, here represented by his Secretary General of Acció Exterior. Let me, I think that before thanking the speakers, trying to wrap up some ideas that I think are important from what it was said today. The first one is that data and evidence on climate change due to anthropogenic action is indisputable, is scientifically accepted, and there is strong evidence of it. So there is no way that we can challenge this evidence, and I think that this is something on which we need to accept as a reality. That's the first thing. The second thing that goes with it is that some of these changes probably will last for a long time, and there is nothing we can do about them. And this was very well expressed by Paco Douglas, But he also said that there are some effects that still we can have an effect on them. And I think that we need to make sure that at least we can contribute to have an impact on these still possible changes to mitigate and to adapt to climate change. So the good thing that there is still a window for intervention, and how to cope about this, it's much more difficult, but at least we know that there are some of the changes for which there is still a room for intervention. The second very important idea is that I think that biodiversity, climate change, interventions, everything is completely interlinked, and they need to be assessed always by the perspective of quality of life of people. I think that this is an idea that Vicky brought forward, and I think it's very important. We know a lot about the evidence on the biophysical impact of climate change, but we know much less on the socio-economic impact of climate change. There are less studies about this. They are much more complex, as Elena showed us, that there are very many technological hurdles to achieve and to have the data needed to make a proper assessment on the socio-economic impact. But if there are measures that all of them will be painful, all these measures that will be painful and very difficult to implement will only be taken because there is a socioeconomic impact of the climate change. Otherwise, I mean, because there are biophysical impact, people would care much less. And I think that is a very strong idea that we need to look always in the interventions thinking of the quality of life of people. This is the main parameter and what we need to focus on. Alain was underlining the increasing gap between supply and demand in the natural resources, especially in the Mediterranean. And this mainly has to do with water, but also with soil, with the sort of agriculture we have, the sort of an exploding demography. It is not the climate change is responsible for all the problems or the challenges we have in the Mediterranean. Is that the climate change exacerbates the problems and the challenges we have in the Mediterranean. And I think that this is only an accelerator of a lot of series of problems that we already had, and we already have for many years, which have to do with food security, demographic changes, you name them, pollution, overfishing, overexploitation, and so on and so forth. So these challenges get exacerbated because of climate change, and this is why climate change maybe make them more evident. But the problems exist, and we need to act on them all. And I think that here the fact that there are methodological issues to assess the dimension of this impact in the society is something that we need to solve, and I think that Elaine explained them very well. And then we go to the part of the decision makers that they have to intervene, propose interventions, and all these interventions will be painful. We know that these will not be interventions there will be easy, there will be very painful interventions. And I think that here there are several ideas trying to engage people in the solutions, but to engage people in the solutions, they need to be first engaged in the definition of the problems. So people need to not only be aware, but also understand the dimension of the problems. And this is not an issue of educating people at all, is engaging them in the diagnosis. And of course, when they are engaged in the diagnosis, they would be maybe engaged in the solutions also. Not easy, very difficult, and we need, I mean, Joan was mentioning them, the taking into account very much the local level, but also the national or international level. So both levels need to be taken very much into account. And then, since these interventions will be painful, make or have, he was saying distributive measures, I don't know which ones, but certainly accompanying the ones who will suffer most. So we need transition measures that to make these measures more palatable, more acceptable, less difficult for those who will suffer most. The situation is very bad. I think that COVID has been a sort of a small example of a much bigger problem, which is the climate change. I mean, COVID is just like a kid's joke compared to climate change, but we've shown that when we have a problem, the role of science, COVID showed us the role of science, the role of international cooperation, the role of taking measures in trial and error that we've been just seeing all these last 2 years, and the difficult decisions that have been taken. Some of them maybe were not justified looking at the eyes of today, but 2 years ago we knew nothing about this problem. And with climate change we'll have many more of these, and much bigger, much more important. So we need to be prepared and to raise awareness with all our constituencies. Thank you very much. I finish here. Thanking very much the speakers for their interventions, for those attending. Certainly, I must say that the EMET preparation, and this is not my opinion, but with all my team, from all my team, I think that we can say that has been the preparation of the organization very professional. So thank you very much for you teaching us how to do it, because you have much more experience in the organization of these sort of events. And thank you very much. We have a lot of work to do in sense of deepening in these issues that we need to do much more. And certainly Prima will be here to provide with our small contribution when we are just a small organization, but trying to contribute to all these ideas. So understanding the challenges we have in the Mediterranean, trying to do projects more and more intersectorial, so getting out from the sectors and trying to do more and more, trying to be more and more intersectorial, and trying to align countries around cooperation. This is very important. Countries, especially from the south side of the Mediterranean, are not integrated at all. They very often they speak through us, which makes no sense at all. And trying to foster their integration, their cooperation, and the cooperation with us. because we have the same challenges, even if we are very different, but the challenges are the same. I mean, and there is no one on its own able to cope with these problems. So we need to do it to cope or to address them, all of us together. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon in another occasion. Bye-bye. Ça fait une année.